So let's talk about Sweden and Norway, two countries that are often thought of really favorably in just a whole bunch of ways. So they score pretty well in the whole carbon discussion, at least at first blush. So taking a quick look at Norway and Sweden, you can see their emissions are roughly the same. In comparison to other countries in the world, they're very low on the list. So let's dive a little deeper on Sweden. And Sweden, we can see they've got lower power emissions than most countries. That's because they use a bunch of nuclear. Add that to hydro, and they have very little emissions from their energy sector. They also have very fuel economic cars, so a lot of good data there. All told, gives them my favorite metric, carbon intensity, 0.09. So to some extent, Sweden might be the role model for all countries, at least in terms of emissions. Moving on to Norway, we see that their energy is a little higher proportionately than Sweden's. That's due to their lack of nuclear power. They do use a lot of hydro. So, all in all, their emissions are in good shape. Their carbon intensity is just a little below zero point 0.1, definitely within the measurement error. So, pretty good score. At least that's what it looks to be shaping up like, right? What could possibly be the problem? Well, the problem has to do with GDP and what happens when you try to do it per capita. So first, I'm showing how it looks when you're looking at a carbon intensity. You see that they use their wealth in a relatively low emissions fashion. So that's great. A little side note here for those who are paying close attention, some of this data varies than what you may see in other slides. And that's why when I'm talking about these numbers that you pull from these databases, I use them to give me a rough idea. The details, depending on how they're calculated, often vary a bit. So they're estimates, not absolute numbers you should trust 100%. So a favored way to measure emissions, and this a lot of UN agencies, includes population. And you can understand why you might want to include population because, after all, is it fair that everyone in the world, doesn't get to have the same amount of emissions? And right away, I'm going to say, no, it's not fair, but the Earth doesn't care. So, look what happens when I throw in population. Sweden is now twice as good as Norway. Norway is equivalent to China, and apparently the US is the big problem. That, however, doesn't tell me anything about how to slow down greenhouse gas emissions. Unless you're going to say the US should just get poorer, and I suppose you could try that. If the other answer is, hey, let's let China come up to the per capita of the US, and they're running a carbon intensity that's more than 2 times what the US is running, you're going to see emissions skyrocket, and you're going to see temperatures climb to numbers you never thought were possible. So I understand why people want to add in population, but you're mixing the equity and the carbon pollution questions. They need to be kept separate. They're both valid questions, but they do not correlate. What it does do is encourage a blame game situation, and that only makes matters worse. And then I chose Sweden and Norway specifically because I could get also into a blame game about Norway because Norway is a major exporter of fossil fuels. They have a lot of money saved. So should Norway be footing the bill for all the nations may suffer? Saudi Arabia? Sometimes you hear this argument, right, about oil companies. Isn't it their fault? You go into this blame game and you're going to spend so much time arguing, you're not going to work on the problem. The topic of carbon providers versus carbon users is subject for an entire future video. So this brings us to the scorecard. This should be fairly straightforward. Carbon intensity, both Norway and Sweden score very well. On cumulative carbon, also strong scores there. Not perfect because countries that aren't using any are going to score a little better, but still very strong. Moving on then to 2030 plans, good plans in place. Looks like they can be achieved. Sweden gets a little bit of a nudge because of their maintaining nuclear. 2060, they've got a proven track record. No reason to believe that they're not going to stay one of the world's standards for controlling greenhouse emissions. Feel free to comment with your thoughts on the scores in the comment section below. Subscribe if you want to hear more, and look forward to talking to you in the future.